Dubbed by some the Invisible Storm, Hurricane Ida wreaked havoc on 12 New Jersey counties on September 1st as it barreled up from Louisiana with record rainfalls, high winds, and utter devastation. In fact, more people have applied to FEMA than during Superstorm Sandy. And unlike Superstorm Sandy that widely hit the Jersey Shore and was broadcast across the airwaves, many of those impacted by Ida were in areas that were untouched by the 2012 storm. And unlike Sandy, many of those impacted have not yet been heard from. A Future with Hope is listening and offering a helping hand. Hear from Disaster Response Coordinator Andrea Wren-Hardin, who is facilitating this effort toward relief, repair, rebuild, and renew, while she talks with Reverend Chris Heckert of Haddonfield UMC and A Future with Hope's board chair.
Andrea, thanks for talking to me today about A Future with Hope. I don't know where you were in late August, but my family and we were excited to get my kids back to school. And then September 1st, down here in South Jersey, everything kind of changed when Hurricane Ida hit. You want to share a little bit about that from your perspective?
Sure. So Hurricane Ida hit here in the state of New Jersey on September 1st after coming up from Louisiana where it made landfall. And we actually have 12 counties that were majorly impacted by Hurricane Ida, either through tornadoes, wind damage, or severe flooding in places that had never experienced the levels of water that came up from Hurricane Ida with the rain and then with the surging water that came up.
Down here in South Jersey, we saw a lot of houses with trees on them and just things ripped apart. In other parts of the state, water damage was the prevalent cause of disaster.
Major flooding in a lot of areas, and people driving in their vehicles because of the flash floods and having to abandon their cars in the middle of the street. Trees down, just like in South Jersey. Most of the damage has been from the level of water, 5 feet of water, 8 feet of water coming up in buildings and homes.
So you and I both know that A Future with Hope was started right after Superstorm Sandy 9 years ago, on October 29th, 2012. Sandy hit New Jersey, and there was just an outpouring of concern, love, and care from around the country. And our conference founded A Future with Hope. And now, 9 years later, this is a very different type of disaster to respond to, wouldn't you say?
It is definitely very different. It is the first major disaster declaration since Sandy here in New Jersey. But it's very different for a number of reasons. Number one, as you noted, you don't see it on the news anywhere. It was on the news for about a week and then it went away. And one of the reasons is there are currently in the United States 70 major disaster declarations across the country. Wildfires in California, Hurricane Ida hitting landfall in Louisiana, just two, for example. Also, I would say it's how Hurricane Ida came up through the states and the areas that were impacted. So there are 12 counties that have received major disaster declarations here in New Jersey. And in those counties, there are pockets in towns and neighborhoods and streets where Ida impacted homes. So when you think about water surge and flash flooding and the areas that it hits, it doesn't cover very large areas. Water will always find its way in. And so Hurricane Ida has actually hit smaller neighborhoods and pockets and streets, which is a lot different than how Sandy came in with the swampland areas.
And aside from houses and residential areas, I know a number of our United Methodist churches were also damaged or devastated.
We actually here in our conference have 23 churches and parsonages that were impacted by Ida. A couple of those had also been impacted by Sandy, so had rebuilt after that disaster and have now experienced flooding again and more disaster in their buildings. Those churches had a lot of flood damage and wind damage, resulting in close to $1 million worth of damage it's going to take to recover and repair those buildings.
Doesn't insurance cover those damages?
So all the churches and parsonages, as you know, here in G&J have insurance coverage, but it's very limited. And it's actually not a lot. And so there's going to be a very large, and there is a very large unmet need that our churches are experiencing. The gap between what insurance will cover and what they actually need to repair their buildings so that they're safe for usage again.
And particularly when it's flooding, right?
Exactly,
that's
yes.
Excluded from some policies.
Exactly. And because Hurricane Ida, with the flash flooding, And a lot of our churches were in areas that had never had flooding before, right? So the water came up in areas that hadn't experienced that. So you wouldn't expect them to be prepared for flooding. But actually the devastation with the water coming in, destroying boilers and electrical panels and water heaters and walls and buildings and actual spaces where ministry was being done in those buildings. It's very impactful.
So there is a lot in common with Superstorm Sandy, although it's different. And I remember back in 2012 and 13, we had organized around 4 stages of recovery: relief, repair, rebuild, and renew. Are we using that same framework? And if so, where are we in those stages?
We are. That framework proved to be very successful in the recovery and makes sense in terms of disaster recovery cycles. So right now we are still in the relief phase. FEMA has actually extended its deadline for registration to December 6th because it's taking a long time for people to register due to the nature of the storm in the areas to get the communication out that they actually can register for FEMA. So we're still in the relief phase from September 1st to November in mucking out and gutting out homes that have been damaged. So what I can tell you is that to date, 73,000 people have applied for assistance from FEMA because their homes have been damaged or they're out of their rentals, which is more than what it registered for FEMA during Superstorm Sandy. So although it might not be visible to us every day as we're living our lives, the damage is real and it is invasive in these neighborhoods.
There's 73,000 in New Jersey?
In New Jersey alone, absolutely. So we know that it's just taking a while to find the homes that have been damaged, to find where the need is located. And so the mucking and gutting out in the relief phase is still ongoing and is still happening. Some people are still living in their homes that have not yet been cleaned out because New Jersey also has a housing crisis. And there's nowhere for them to go. So we're still very much in the relief phase, and we're looking to begin our repair phase early next summer in June 2022. So looking at the registrants that we have, understanding that about 10% of those are going to have an unmet need, and looking at some of the guidelines that A Future with Hope and G&J holds for recovery, meaning that when households have an unmet need, how do we decide who to assist with donated dollars? When people give their dollars to a disaster, they want to be sure it's going to someone that really needs it. So A Future with Hope needs good case management to determine what the unmet need is and hold to the same guidelines of serving those who are elderly, who are low income, and who are disabled. And we know that there is a large percentage of those that are currently part of the registration. And so for program goals of what we're looking to do over the next 2 to 3 years is to engage 200 households to help them complete their recovery from Hurricane Ida, repair 50 homes in the impacted counties, and also engage close to 2,000 volunteers to be able to do that work with nonprofit builders. One difference that we know we're going to have in the Hurricane Ida recovery is due to the 12 counties, the urban nature of the disaster, and the limited resource and lack of attention to this disaster, is we're going to need to do a lot more collaboration and a lot more coordination. So to that end, A Future with Hope, G&J, is part of New Jersey volunteer organizations active in disaster. We are working with them to figure out how we can effectively and efficiently deliver resources and assistance to impacted families.
Superstorm Sandy, you were one of those case managers that worked with families, and we worked with FEMA and the VOADs that you mentioned. How do we show up as a partner? How do we find our way along with these other partner organizations in the midst of a disaster? So
one of the things we do is we find, okay, what is our strength that we can offer to other partners? How can we engage other partners? And in Superstorm Sandy, we had a very strong model across G&J of volunteers and case management with A Future with Hope, which are 2 key elements to determining need and helping rebuild and repair homes. And so those are the 2 areas that A Future with Hope is really looking to be impactful as we partner with other nonprofits for a collaborative effort. And I'm going to say this again because there are 2 words I think are really important, is being efficient, which means using any dollars or any other resources in a way that's not duplicating services and spreads the resources where they're actually needed, and also being effective so that families actually go home, that they actually are able to recover, either to the home that they were in prior to Hurricane Ida or finding a new situation, but that we can determine that they've received the resources they need to recover from the storm.
So you use this word volunteer, and we are Methodists. Good Methodists love to be on site and love to come out. In Superstorm Sandy, we had volunteers from all over the United States. We know it's probably going to be a different climate for volunteering right now, given the pandemic and other things. What are your thoughts on how we will recruit and bring volunteers here?
You're right, Chris. We've been living through a pandemic, and for the last 2 years, so we know what that does. We also, as I said earlier, there are major disaster declarations all across the country. So there are volunteers needed in a lot of places, and there aren't the same number of volunteers that there have been. So we're really looking to call on our Methodists here in New Jersey and our connectional system that we have to volunteer to help repair homes. Also, there are other organizations that do volunteer repair, volunteer rebuild. That is their mission for their organization. A couple of them are already here in the state of New Jersey, and so we're going to be looking to how we can partner with them to rebuild the 50 homes that we see we're going to be able to do over the next 2 to 3 years.
So if a church says, we're ready, I have volunteers waiting in the wings, when will we be ready to take volunteers, and what kind of work can they do?
So we're ready to take volunteers for mucking out and gutting out. As I said earlier, we're we're in the relief phase. We have ERT teams that are setting up. We have trainings that are ongoing to retrain ERTs and make sure that they're certified, and to retrain for assessments, to go into homes, do the assessment so the teams know what they need to do. We have a volunteer coordinator ready to coordinate those work days and work with our churches, especially right now, that need that cleaning out and the gutting out. And then what we anticipate is that we will be ready to begin the repair phase early next summer of 2022.
So we can take folks now and then again next summer.
Yes.
Great. So for churches, leaders, and members who want to support, what do you want them to know? If there's anything else that we haven't covered that you want folks to know about, what might that be?
Well, I would say the first thing is to really understand that there is a need. It might not be in the front of our face, we might not see it, but there are people out of their homes in hotels that have been out of their homes since September 1st and are really struggling to find out how they're going to get back into their home. So the need is very real in these pockets of neighborhoods. And so to understand that, also hopefully call you to be able to volunteer. You can volunteer to clean out. You can volunteer to coordinate. If you have a heart for wanting to help people that are impacted, we will find a place for you to serve, because the need is that great. And then thirdly, I would say financial resources, right? In order to do work, in order to help people recover and make sure that they get back into their homes, you need the dollars to be able to go toward those families so that they can actually recover.
So folks want to give, how would they do that?
So there are a couple ways to give. You can go directly to the gnjumc.org website and look for Ida Relief. 100% of your proceeds go directly to Ida Relief, and it will be used for the program goals and for direct assistance for families. You can also give through your local church, put your check in the offering plate designated for Ida Relief to ensure that actually going toward Ida Relief funds.
And I think a natural question that I receive is, where's UMCOR in all of this, right? And we're the United Methodist Church, the United Methodist Committee on Relief is the first there and the last to leave, oftentimes in a natural disaster. And I know that we're partnering with UMCOR, so I thought you might want to talk about that for a second.
Yes, UMCOR is, as you said, an incredible organization, Methodist organization that does a lot of great work. I've already been in conversation with them, talked with them about the program goals and the budget they're developing to be able to make that happen. And UMCOR is definitely going to be a partner with G&J and A Future with Hope during this recovery.
Great. Andrea, 9 years ago, during Superstorm Sandy, you and I were at Morrow Memorial United Methodist Church working with folks who had lost their power. Who knew we would be here with this nonprofit, continuing to help people who are displaced because of natural disaster. What I can say is I can't think of anyone better to lead this effort, with more knowledgeable, more diligent, and with more skill sets than you. So I'm grateful for you that you're doing this work and to be in conversation. So thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you, Chris. I'm humbled to be able to do it, and I know that with all of the strength that we have in our churches throughout this state, that we can actually make a difference in people's lives that have been impacted and help them recover and get home. Thank you.
Thanks.
Are you ready to journey with A Future with Hope down this road to renewal?
Perfect.
Donate today on the G&J homepage, and let's help our neighbors today.
Yes,